If you didn't see part 1 of this video, the full playlist will be right at the top of the description, so you can start from the beginning.
Hello and welcome to my bank video. First I'll show my stats like most bank videos. 75 attack, though I sure can't afford a Sarah Godsword.
Hello everyone, my name is Andrew, AJT, and welcome to Pre-EoC RuneScape from around 2008 to 2012, and times were much different back then, and today we're going to go on a Barrows trip. It wouldn't be right to do this series without showing a lot of Barrows because I did so much Barrows at the time. It was literally my favorite minigame. It was the minigame all my friends did. And I actually found this clip from 2010 of a Barrows trip, probably an early one because I'm in Mystic here, so I was really probably just getting used to it and couldn't afford all the best gear yet. This footage is actually extremely good quality for the era, other than the frame rate isn't great. For some reason, this clip is like a pink unicorn. It's a non-compressed video of this Barrows trip, and you can actually really get a good idea of what the HD graphics look like. They look really nice, actually. I do miss these a little bit because we just haven't seen them in such a long time. And they're a nice mix of old school and new school because the items and stuff still look the same. That was one thing I really hated in maybe 2012 or so, maybe a little bit before that, when they updated like the Dragon Scimitar and rune items and Barrows and stuff to make it look totally different and all cartoony. But for the most part with this, the items look pretty recognizable compared to what we're used to in old school, so it was probably one of the better times for graphics in the game. Barrows was actually considered a pretty difficult minigame at the time, and not a lot of people actually were able to do it because the average player probably wouldn't have even had Priest in Peril done. I talked a lot in the 06 videos about how people were very newbie back then, and that was still true in pre-EoC, probably not to the extent it was in the 06 era where everyone was pretty much clueless. But for the average player, Barrows would be a pretty daunting task, and I'm actually using a strategy here which was very popular, the Chaos Gauntlet strategy. Runes were very expensive, so you would typically want to use something like that because it would be very cost effective, especially during the trade limit days, which I think this would be a part of if I'm not mistaken. Runes were actually quite expensive because there was really no bots. When the trade limit was introduced, it really got rid of a lot of bots, which is what it was intended to do, because you couldn't real world trade anymore, I guess, because you can't just go and trade someone a bill. It was based on quest points, and they definitely changed the system a few times. I think it could be as low as a 3k trade limit. I remember Jagex explaining it as if you need to trade someone an anti-poison or a shark or something, you'll still be able to do that, but looking back, it wasn't bad actually. It really did serve its intended purpose and really cut down in the bots in the game. It also really felt like there was so many good money makers because bots didn't ruin so many of them. For example, nowadays, if you just want to go pick flax or something, what's the point? Because I'm sure there's plenty of bots there picking it, and are you really going to compete with someone who's going and picking flax 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? That's just not realistic. So many moneymakers like that could be ruined by bots, and during the trade limit days, they really weren't. Of course, there were still individual players who would bot on their main accounts, and they would get banned eventually, but there wasn't this mass army of bots like we see in other eras. By the way, picking flax was actually like 100k per hour back then, and it's what people would do typically when they were very poor. There was no free spade around here, by the way. If you wanted a spade, you had to bring one yourself, and if you forgot it, you're teleporting back to Varrock and walking because the transportation methods to Barrows were very limited, unless you had a lot of quests done. I can also say, looking at these Barrows clips, that RuneScape was a lot more of a social game at the time, and there was a lot more of an MMO feel to it. Nowadays we have solo bosses and solo content, but most of the time it was group activities back then. And even in a solo minigame like Barrows, you would see people standing around talking, saying, "Hey, any luck, man? Oh, I got a Darok helm earlier. Wow, super nice." These people are talking in a different language, so I don't know what they're saying. But it was certainly a lot more common to just strike up a conversation with a fellow player, whereas today it would almost be something out of the ordinary. So this is pretty interesting. Look at this thing right above the tombstone. That is actually a player gravestone. And that was actually something introduced in late 2007. Before that, when you died, all your items are on the floor right away. Everyone can pick them up, and if they don't, or if you don't get back there to pick them up yourself, then they're going to disappear within about 2 minutes. So gravestones were added just to give you a little bit of a chance to get your items back yourself, and they weren't very lenient. So basically how it works is your gravestone appears there, and you have just a few minutes to get your stuff back. Depending on the type of gravestone, you could actually pay to upgrade it with GP and other quests and such. And if you get back there while the gravestone is still active, you can pick up your stuff before anyone gets it. Now, before the trade limit was introduced, if the gravestone collapsed after the few minutes, your stuff would actually be visible to everyone else. Although, when the trade limit was added, obviously this was removed and your stuff would actually just disappear. But the cool feature to it was you could actually bless gravestones, so you see there actually someone blessed the gravestone, so just to be a good Samaritan, he's giving the other player more time to collect their stuff. This was also useful at like God Wars, for example. If someone died at God Wars and they're your teammate, you would bless their gravestone just to make sure your teammate gets his stuff back, compared to the old days where you would have to pick all of it up and then give it back to him manually, which was a little bit hectic when you got Armadillo attacking you or something. It was actually a great system. It worked really well. It gave the game a good sense of risk, but also not insane risk where if you die, you're just screwed. You knew you would have a chance to get your stuff back, but it would be a very hectic moment when you die to say, I gotta get there as soon as possible. I gotta have a route planned. I gotta know my teleports and my routes, because if you didn't know how to get back to Barrows within 4 or 5 minutes, or maybe even less, you could lose your stuff. But it definitely gave you a chance as well, compared to just saying, well, everyone's going to pick up my stuff and I might as well not even go back. It was actually a really good compromise. Now, in old school, we just have a very basic system where your stuff appears on the floor for 60 minutes and nobody can pick it up, and if you don't get it within an hour, which is quite a long time, then it'll disappear for anyone. Unfortunately, this is probably necessary nowadays just because of different connectivity issues and different ways you can die that are just simply not your fault. Even though it might not work in OSRS for practical reasons, at the time it was actually a really good system. There was also a lot less understood about the game at the time. No one actually knew what kill count you should get for Barrows. People had an idea that maybe around a dozen was good, but it was really a mystery like many other things in the game. And nowadays in OSRS we really know all the drop rates and the code and all that, but back then it was based on people's data from playing themselves and also just estimates. For example, you wouldn't have known the drop rate for an Abyssal Whip or Dragon Boots, which are so ingrained in our heads today, so the sense of wonder for the game was definitely still there as well. Maybe that was a contributing factor, not knowing everything. So I know we're spending a lot of time on Barrows, although it actually did allow us to explain a lot of things from back then. But this is actually my Barrows loots from 2009 and I think 2010 as well. So the best item at the time was the Darroch's helmet. It was worth quite a lot. And you can see here I wrote Woot after I got it. Funny enough, I actually never got a double chest ever. Never in my life have I ever gotten a double chest at Barrows. And maybe I'll get one someday, but for some reason it felt like I was just the only one to really never get one. And just to put a bow on the Barrows stuff, here's a picture I found of someone recognizing me at Barrows from my YouTube videos of the time. Even today, I love when people say hi and nice videos and stuff when they recognize me in game. One of my most memorable personal accomplishments was getting my first ever fire cape. This is right after I got it on December 3rd, 2009, Thursday at 11:25 p.m. As you saw, I wrote at the bottom there. Definitely a very fun accomplishment. Got it on the 7th attempt. I remember going for these. It would take about 3 hours per attempt, so it was definitely a grind back then. Not quite what Inferno is today, but pretty close. There were not too many players running around with fire capes, although as the years went by and the gear got better, they became much more common. I did get another one later on my pier as well at level 1 defense and 64 combat, which a 1 defense fire cape was actually considered one of the bigger challenges in the game at that time. If only they knew, that's all I'm going to say. So one of my favorite weapons from back then was also related to the dragon pickaxe, which I talked about from last video. This was the hand cannon from some of the dwarf quests, and this was quite a cool weapon, which we really don't have in OSRS. I guess the ballista is kinda similar, but not really. It's very different, to be honest, and this weapon was just kind of a beast. It would hit really, really hard. It was very slow, and it had a special attack where it would hit twice, and there was actually a glitch with this at some point where, for some reason, I believe on PvP worlds, if you got a bunch of people together in single combat, you could actually spec people out all at the same time as if it was multi-combat. So if you got like 10 people together and they all used the special attack on someone at the same time in single combat, they would actually all hit at the same time. So it was basically a guaranteed KO. They definitely fixed it pretty quickly, but it was one of the more notorious glitches from the era. You can see in the chat there's a player moderator who's saying lol. That is Telmo Marquez. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, probably not. But he was actually a very famous player. He was a PKer who really got into dungeoneering, and he was actually the first player ever to get level 120 dungeoneering and the max total level at the time, which was a really, really cool accomplishment. Pretty funny that I just noticed this watching this old video. You can also see something on the right. So there was a system back then called Earn Potential. EP is what people called it. So because there was a trade limit, you couldn't just get whatever items the players dropped when they died. Sometimes you could get them. Like I remember sometime someone actually got a PK of full bandos, and they did actually get the bandos task sets despite the trade limit. But typically you would get these randomly generated items, and the more EP you had just by waiting around in dangerous areas, the better the drops you would get. And by the way, that was so funny. I just turned on Prey Melee when I saw this guy was about to declaw spec, and that was actually something you could do because the game was a lot laggier during pre-EoC. At least for most people's computers, the game wasn't going to be super responsive or fluid like it is in OSRS today. So that was something you could do. I will say that the bounty hunter system of EP and all that was not nearly as good as just having free trade and being able to get whatever drops you would normally get from your opponent's gear. And there was also tons of people who would ask for a 76k trick, which is basically killing someone with 76k on them, so you would qualify for that random drop table. You can also see on the right there that little timer, which is how long you could be attacked for after you exit the wilderness, so you couldn't just keep running in and out. Here's a little clip called Whip Drop on video, which probably would have been fairly uncommon because you're not just going to sit there recording all your gameplay on your 120 gigabyte hard drive back then. One thing that was kind of funny is I actually get rickrolled right before I get it. I could probably make a whole video just on the memes from the time, but sure enough, I do get a whip drop, which probably was worth quite a few mil. Definitely was one of the nice things with the trade limit is the items were very valuable. So this is really fun looking through a lot of all these old videos. I definitely was very happy with the response to part 1, and I think I'll do another part next week as well, a part 3. There's still a whole bunch of stuff to talk about. I think we did a good job of explaining some of the differences between pre-EoC and OSRS in this video. Don't get me wrong, OSRS is so amazing, but it's definitely fun to look back at RuneScape HD and pre-EoC and just looking at how different things were at the time. Definitely leave a like on this video if you enjoyed. That's the best way to support the channel. The part 3 to this video will be uploaded on Tuesday, January 28th, 2020, so if that date has already passed, you can actually just go watch part 3 right now. I'll put the full playlist down below and also in the end screen, as well as the 06 Pictures series if you haven't seen that. But in the meantime, what were your memories of pre-EoC RuneScape? Tell me all about them. I love reading about the memories and stories from the time. And if you didn't play back then, what's your impression of the game in pre-EoC compared to OSRS or RS3 today? Whichever you currently play. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel as well and turn bell notifications on all so you don't miss my new videos every Tuesday. You can join our clan chat in game, Andrew AJT62. You can join our Discord server down below. You can follow me on Twitter down below at Andrew AJT. And if you want to support the channel even further, you can check out my Patreon page in the end screen. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.